Welcome to the Masculinity Unmasked podcast with hosts Greg Stein, Max Wilson, and Linda Tilson.
Okay. Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of the Masculinity Unmasked podcast, the fortnightly conversation which delves deep into the issues impacting men today. We're here to have the conversations you might not be having elsewhere. Honest, open, sometimes uncomfortable, but always important. The title for today's episode is Meet Max, which is amazing and awesome that we get to interview each other. We're the hosts of the show. And I'm very lucky to have you here with us, Max and Max Wilson. And what I most wanted to let our audience know is that you are a men's self-leadership coach. And I want to thank you for joining me today on this journey. And will you start by sharing with our audience a bit about your story and the work that you do?
Yeah, thanks, Linda. Really interesting to be on the receiving end as the interviewee on here. Yeah, so a little bit about my story. So we thought we'd do these episodes so we could get to know each other a little bit better for the listeners. So we're interviewing each other, and this is going to be a bit of a series, which is fun. So by way of background, how did I even get into the men's coaching works? I was just stopped all through. I was originally a lawyer. Started out as a lawyer, a barrister in London, and there was parts of that role that I really enjoyed, but a lot of it that I didn't. But I didn't have any form of self-leadership skills, and I can talk around what I mean by that a little bit later on. But I just didn't know how to look after myself in a high-pressure industry environment. I'd never been taught that in the education system or anywhere else. Yeah, I reached my own sort of rock bottom, um, and had to think, well, what's next? And I didn't think there was a life outside of law of what I was doing. And I eventually moved into higher education, and really loved that idea of helping people grow and to lead their own lives. So I helped a lot of students through that process. And I was like, I want to do more of this. And then jumped into the coaching and training space, which is what I do now. So I not just training, but also just general facilitation work. So I work predominantly with men as a men's self-leadership coach, but I'm also a facilitator and trainer in organizations. So I go in and deliver training to organizations on all stuff self-leadership and all stuff well-being, essentially. And I also run some group programs, which we can come on to.
Absolutely. I really love your background, the fact that, you decided to take in the subject of self-leadership, which to me, we talk about leading others, but here we're talking about leading self. And so
Mhm.
I'm curious, are there any myths or cliches that you feel that dismantling is important for you to do by showing up as yourself, that you can
Mhm.
demonstrate that?
Yeah. So I guess it's helpful to start by sort of defining what I mean by self-leadership, and people have their own definitions, but we're so used to being leaders of other people, whether that's in teams, in our own families. We might step into leadership positions, but very few of us have the skills and tools to be effective leaders of our own lives because we're not taught this in the education system. We're not taught this in our jobs. We might have received ad hoc training, but we don't tend to get a full course on how do we look after ourselves in practice. What does high performance actually look like operating in a high pressure industry? How is that sustainable? Self leadership is all about how do we become effective leaders of our own lives? And there's different levels that I speak to on that, which we can go into. How does that link to me showing up as myself? So um, I think what really resonates with people is that I've been on the ground where people are. I know what it's like to operate in a high pressure industry. I know what it's like to have lots of noise in the mind, to be trying to find the time to do any of the things that I know will support me and also feel like I don't have any purpose. So I get it. I get how my clients feel when they come to me. Um, and I'm also quite a different men's coach in the sense that a lot of the men's coaches out there are very sort of alpha drill sergeant type. And there's a space for that. And there's people who need that in their lives. And I think any form of change work, it can be incredibly powerful. But the space I provide is something a bit different, which is you don't need to put on a mask and come in, and you don't need me to be stepping into a drill sergeant role for us to do some really transformative work. We can both be ourselves. I can hold a space that's very grounding and calm, still gently challenging, but deeply transformative. And so I provide that different space, and that works for a lot of guys who don't want that sort of more alpha drill sergeant type of coaching.
I think that's really refreshing that you can step into this space where you can be compassionate and challenging without being in that alpha drill sergeant mentality. Because, like you said, there's a time and a place where that could be very useful, but there's also the time where that's not what's useful. What's useful
Mm,
is to go to that softer space. And I think there's still a reluctance for men to go to that softer space, but that is where the balancing of the energies happens. It's where you can nurture your team members. You can nurture yourself, and you
yeah,
can't do that in the other energy in the same way.
yeah, exactly that. I think so many men are so hard on themselves already. And the last thing they often need is someone, another man barking at them. And to see that there's another version of masculinity that's possible. There's another version that they can step into. It's actually much more nurturing, but also deeply grounded and assertive, can be quite empowering for people to see. And that was certainly my own experience. And that's what I wanted at the time that I was looking for guides, mentors, coaches, um, someone who was similar to me. I didn't find it in men's groups. I struggled to find it one to one. So I thought, there's a real space for this. And that's often reflected back to me as well in terms of like my style and the type of work that's still deeply transformative, changes lives, but doesn't need a stick to beat people with at the same time.
So what I'm hearing here, Max, is that you've become that version or that type of coach that you would have wanted when you were looking for one in these different spaces where you didn't really identify with the style, may not have identified even with the strategies that were being presented, or even
Mm,
maybe even the same people in the room, because certain types of coaches do cultivate a following of different types of backgrounds. And, one of the things I did wanna speak to today is that, like, when you're not being your self leader, that means you're not taking care of yourself in a lot of ways, in a way that is good for you. So what can
mm,
happen is you can quickly, as a man, put yourself into burnout mode. So tell me more about what's really behind when you either experience burnout yourself or you see somebody going through the signs of it. What is really going on underneath?
mm. I think it's always the same, which is we've been running on the treadmill for, for too long. We run on the treadmill at all costs until we can't run anymore because we don't know what else to do. We're given this man box when we're kids that says, don't show your emotions, don't be feminine. So a degradation of the feminine quite early on, and be like the other boys. And so as adults running on the corporate treadmill, don't show your emotions. Okay, well, I'm struggling, so I can't display that. Don't be feminine. So what might be associated with feminine qualities from a gendered perspective, a gendered construct, nurturing, for example, a well-being, some spaces still heavily gendered, on the female side, if we look at the general practices like yoga and things like that. So that makes that largely inaccessible. And then be like the other boys. Well, nobody else is struggling, so I can't struggle. So there's this narrative, and it's only when we reach a point of collapse that we have to change. And that was my experience, and that's a lot of the experiences, or most of the experiences of the guys that come to me. There's been a point of collapse of some sort, and it doesn't have to be necessarily a dramatic collapse. For some people, it is. It is full-on burnout, panic disorder, which I had, crippling anxiety. For some, it's just crushing pressure and stress and overwhelm. And we all reach this point, but it's only at that point where we experience enough pain that we want change. I think I mess up the quote, but I think it's something like change only happens when the pain of staying where you are is worse than the fear of change, basically. So we stay put until that point where it's so painful that we have to move on. And I think that's where a lot of men are, sadly. And that was my That was my personal experience as well.
And so really waiting until you hit that point where you can't go on anymore because the pain, the suffering, the stress is too much. What we
Mm,
need to do is to put more on the, I guess, on the perspective out in the world that don't wait till it's so bad to make a change. You don't have to. You can
mm,
see the signs of stress in your body. You can feel certain emotions that are running through you, and it's okay to acknowledge those emotions, whether they're on the softer side of the spectrum or the harder side of the spectrum, and that maybe we should think less about trying to be a certain type of man and
mm.
to realize that there's different shades of manhood.
Yeah, yeah,
Is a way of
absolutely.
looking at it.
And that's the reason why I created the Vulnerability Club, is because to reflect those different shades of manhood. You know, a lot of the men's groups are just drill sergeant, alpha male type. That's reflected in the branding, in the videos that they put up on the sites. And as I say, I'm not bashing those sites. They are incredible. The work that they do for men, and that is needed for a lot of men, because they haven't seen, for example, that there is another way. But some men already feel different. They already feel they need another way, and that's the group that I provide through the Vulnerability Club, turning the vulnerability into strength. But for people who, they may be LGBT plus, they may feel like they're straight but metrosexual or non-alpha. So they might be quite timid, for example. They might be more introverted, or they might just not be interested in some of the macho pursuits that other men are. So there's different reasons why we might feel like an outsider. But if we are out an outsider, we get chucked out of that man box, and then there's no like blueprint of where we go next, because these men's groups don't feel like a fit. That's the gap, the space that I wanted to plug, is like there is a space for you if you are one of those men. And yeah, there is a lot of support out there, which is what I was looking for, a good few years back. So yeah, I think that's a large part of it.
I really appreciate that you created that space because I have also witnessed with the men that I worked with that some of them have gone to circles or spaces and they say I don't identify with the people or that are in those particular groups and I said it's just like anything else. Try more than one. See what
Mm.
fits. Go to one group and if it's not the right people, coach, and space and things that they're doing, go to another one. And
Yeah.
when I've advocated, you know, shopping around, and they've been
Mm.
pleasantly surprised that they did find spaces and places where they felt like they could belong, doing activities that they enjoy. Yeah, and so you don't know what you don't know. So that's
So
what
true.
makes it challenging because there is no blueprint. A lot of times if you can grab one of your friends to go with you to go to some of these spaces, it makes it a little less intimidating. It makes it a little more like, I can do this.
Yeah. 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 Exactly that. And now there's many groups, so we can sort of cherry pick. There's a buffet of options, so we can sort of lean into what feels right for you. And I would definitely advocate that. And going back to your previous question, I don't think we don't need to wait to crisis to do that. If the cracks are already starting to appear in your job, in your world, in your relationship, your personal life, your professional life, you can feel that with stress levels rising, if you're feeling overwhelmed, needing to control everything, but feeling out of control. These are all signals to the body that it wants change. And you can start this journey whenever. You don't need to wait until that crisis point. And what you'll see by coming to these men's groups is that you will be held, you will be supported, you won't be called an idiot. And the biggest myth that we all hold will be debunked, which is, I'm alone in thinking like this. The one question every single client asks me, am I alone in thinking like this? Question I asked when I first reached out for support, right? No. So for anybody listening, no. A resounding no, you're not. In fact, you make up the overwhelming majority. I haven't met a client yet who hasn't asked that question. And when you go to these groups, it will be quite eye-opening in that sense. You'll see how much struggle there really is in our community as men. and how much we repress and how much we mask, but also the power of group, the power of community, of having a tribe, and how you could be held, not fixed, but just held with all that stuff. And when you feel that, that strength of that community, once you've opened that door, it's hard to close it. That's where the real sort of journey of growth starts. But it doesn't have to be a men's group. If that feels too overwhelming, if you're more introverted, for example, I mean, introverts go to men's groups. But if you feel like it's a starting point, get somebody one-to-one, get a coach, or even another type of thinking partner. It could be a therapist, it could be a mentor, but just somebody that you can offload the stuff to, because you're absolutely not alone.
And it could definitely be a mixed group of different perspectives.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's also, yeah, good point.
So I'd like to know more about the program that you have been building and putting out to the world, because it's all about that self-leadership. And
Mm,
I know that you've got a unique twist to it. And so
mm.
could you share with us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So it's called the Sovereign Self Program. And the idea is that we all have a sovereign self. So it's this independent, self governing, free self. And we know that when we're in sovereign self state, because we feel in flow, those days where things just all work, things seem to click together like clockwork. And maybe it's even a week that you've managed to have like that. Some people have rarely experienced it. Some people experience it more than others, but that is a state that we can tap into more. And the 6 month program starting in September takes men on that journey of self leadership to try and lean into that state more. So we go through different levels of leadership. We look at external leadership, which is all about clearing the surface. So we look at routines, we look at relationships, we look at habits, for example, our environment, what's around us, how we're leading ourselves externally. And then we look at the mindset. So what's going on, mentally. So we've got probably a loud inner critic, lots of noise. We want to release some of those outdated stories. There might be some conditioning that's toxic from the masculinity perspective that we need to unpick as well. Narratives around success, productivity. So we unpick all of that. And then we move on to the core, which is that deepest level of leadership, coming home to ourselves from that grounded place, that sense of alignment, that authentic self. How aligned are we in terms of purpose, values, in terms of the way that we're showing up in our lives? And through tapping into those levels, we access more this state of the sovereign self, and that's the aim, to help more people access that self. And it's a journey, not a destination. So for me, it's the daily practice, and that's how I like to describe it. But we can get quicker at accessing that state through doing this work. So these aren't tick box destinations that we reach, but it's an iterative process. We get better and better and better at becoming self leaders in these areas. The more work that we do.
So I'm curious, most people start with the inner work and they want to work from the inside out. You start with the external first.
Yeah, it's not prescriptive in the sense that I would say let's always start with the external, but externally, we can start to tweak things and make changes that can compound very quickly. The internal has been wired for many, many years. So it can take more work to put into practice some of the stuff. Often we work in tandem. So on a one-to-one setting, I wouldn't say, right, start just with the external, then move on to mindset, then to core. We tend to draw on different parts at any one point. For a program, for a structured program like this, it's important to have sort of checkpoints that we're moving through, I feel. So people can clearly see the areas in their lives where they want to affect change. So it's done for those two reasons, really, so that people have a clear roadmap of where they're headed in different directions, but also allowing them to start to create real change now rather than waiting to see the results further down the line. Makes sense.
Well, it makes total sense. And I appreciate you explaining that in a program, it makes sense to have the checkpoints so you can see where you're at as you're progressing through the program, but yet have the flexibility to be in flow to integrate the external, the internal at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So we're at the point in our conversation where I would like you to share any practical tips or key takeaways that you would like our listeners to embrace and take in today?
I think we can't have any action without awareness. And so the first step is always self-awareness. And what I would invite people to do is start to become aware of their own behaviors, their own patterns, start to make a note of this. Because the more information, the more data that we have in that regard can really, really help when you come to get a thinking partner like a coach who can help work you through this. We know our sort of modus operandi, the way that we've always operated, a lot clearer. And we can begin to create change because we can notice the thing happening. So if it's people pleasing, for example, we can notice that, be aware of that, and then step in and create change. So self-awareness is always the first part before we can take any action. So that's the first thing the second thing I would say is that there is no right way to be a man. There are many, many different forms of masculinity. And actually, as beings, we embody different energies, not just masculine, but also feminine. And there's different qualities that we have as a result of that. So just beginning to explore and lean into some of those other qualities that may have been hidden away for a long time and see what happens as a result. So, for example, that nurturing side that you may have shut off for many, many years, or the empathic side, or it may be leaning into activities that bring you joy, right? So beginning to become open to the idea that there isn't this prescriptive way that we need to live to be a man and to be accepted. That is very much a toxic narrative that we've been given when we're kids. What's going to give you the most fulfillment and bring you the most joy in life is to come back to who you are, whether you're a man or not. And it's quite empowering when people see that, when they start to own their own version of masculinity through just coming back to what brings them joy. So that's what I'd start to lean into, those other parts of self, what lights you up, those spaces where you feel maybe you're performing to fit in and actually, you don't want to be in those spaces anymore as well. So beginning to honor some of that, getting curious around that would be really helpful.
Thank you for sharing all those gems, Max. I mean, making decisions using data and knowing that there's different variations of what it means to be a man. And at the end of the day, throwing away all those definitions, whether they were given to you or you created, and then be who you are. Step into those
Mm,
spaces. I mean, you can't get more authentic and powerful to that than to really be who you are. Express who you
mm,
are in the way that's good to you, and to know that it's okay to move away from places and spaces that aren't contributing to you being in your highest self.
yeah. And that has a ripple effect on everyone around you. But when you
Definitely
step into
does.
that self, yeah.
So, Max, I want to thank you for jumping into this timely, important topic. It's been great to hear all of your thoughts, your words of wisdom. And if people would like to get a hold of you outside of the Masculinity Unmasked podcast, how would they do that?
Yeah, so they can get in contact with me on LinkedIn. My ad is Max Wilson Coaching, or my website is maxwilsoncoaching.com as well. And you can find out more information about my programs. So the Vulnerability Club is a free club, a monthly sharing circle, and the Sovereign Self-Leadership program, which is starting, I'll be running again next year as well. And also for the one-to-one coaching, which people can, we can have a chat about that, see whether that's use to you as well.
And if you resonate with this topic or anything that we've shared today, or if you have any ideas on things you would like us to talk about into the future, please do get in touch. We always love to hear from you. As always, we put the details into our show notes. So if in case you missed a piece of information, it'll be right at your fingertips. And that's all from me. Until next time, take care, everyone.
Thanks, Linda.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Masculinity Unmasked podcast. We're so glad you're here. If this episode resonated with you, hit that subscribe button and share it with a friend who needs to hear it. And if you're really feeling the love, we'll be grateful if you could leave us a 5-star rating. It helps more people find the show. Thanks very much for hanging out with us, and we'll see you next time.